Just to introduce myself, my name is Allison Chan. I'm a partner at Margaret, Wong and Associates. I've been practicing immigration law for just about a decade, and my practice is based in Raleigh, North Carolina, but we have offices around the country with our main head office in Cleveland.
Hi everyone, my name is Rashmi Shah and I am a partner at Bashyam Shah, which is headquartered here in Raleigh. Been practicing about 12 years and mainly practice in the area of business immigration.
So with that, I'm going to screen share our PowerPoint. Let me know if this is, do we have it going? Okay.
Looks good.
All right, great. All righty. So I wanted to start out with agency summary, a summary of the agencies that we work with in immigration and their jurisdictions. This, I think, is such a important issue because this is the reason why immigration is so complex. This is one of the reasons why, immigration reform or comprehensive immigration reform is so hard to pass. Immigration law has been described as one of the most complex types of laws next to tax law. And I think one of the reasons why is there's so many different types of agencies or departments that you're working with. And I will get to that in a moment, but I want to explain the difference between what is immigration law and the difference between state law and federal law. Immigration is a type of federal law, and that is different from state law. Here in the US, we have 50 states, and they each have their own laws. And then we have federal laws that are outside of each state law. Now, I am licensed to practice in New York State and New Jersey State, but I'm able to practice in North Carolina because immigration is under federal law. And as long as I am in good standing in one state, I'm able to practice federal immigration law in any state. Rashmi, are you licensed in North Carolina only, or are you licensed in other states?
Yeah, I'm only licensed in North Carolina. And that, to be honest, as a practicing immigration attorney has been really nice about the field is whether you're moving for personal reasons or professional reasons, state to state, most lawyers have to deal with the bar exam everywhere they move, and that's a real consideration. But thankfully with immigration, the fact that the law and the practice is the same wherever you are makes it easy to practice, but it also makes it easier on clients because as I think you had talked about, you guys have, Allison, offices all over the US too. And whether your, counterpart is sitting in New York or Cleveland, you're talking about the same matters, the same filings, the same client issues, regardless of where we are all sitting, which is really where, we're living in a globalized world. And, the immigration practice being as complicated as it is, it's really nice to have experts all over that we all speak the same language to help the same people.
That's right. And, my clients are all over the country. I mean, they could have had a deportation or removal order in California, but they now live in Raleigh. And so I'm practicing in Raleigh, trying to get their case back in California reopened. But once it's reopened, we'll change the venue to North Carolina. So, and Rashmi has probably business clients all over the country, and she files applications for them, and they all go to a national, a national service center that could be in Nebraska or Vermont. So really our practice is federal in nature and runs across 50 states. But we also work in different agencies. So the three primary agencies that we work with in immigration are U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Department of Justice, and U.S. Department of State. US DHS used to be known as INS, and everybody, say like, oh, now they say, is ICE coming to my house? But it used to be INS this and that. But DHS is now split into USCIS, CBP, and ICE. USCIS is US Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the benefits arm of immigration. They're the one that processes all the immigration applications and benefits. CBP is Customs and Borders Patrol. If you've traveled through airports, you've probably seen CBP checking and inspecting new arrivals into the US or anyone that arrives into the US at ports of entry. ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They are the enforcing branch and the prosecuting branch of immigration. So they are split into enforcement and removal operations, Homeland Security Investigations, and Office of the Chief Counsel. So just within DHS, we're working with five different agencies. And then US Department of Justice, DOJ, is the department that is in charge of the immigration courts and the appellate division. And then the Department of State controls all the consular affairs of immigration. So if you are applying for a visa to come to the United States at a US embassy overseas, that would be under the Department of State. If you are applying for a visa inside the United States and need to consular process that visa and need to go back to your home country to get the visa, that's under the Department of State. So,
Allison, for
yeah.
those, so for the ICE agencies, weren't those just created, I mean, quote unquote, recently, like after like early 2000s?
Yes, just in 2003 they did away with INS and converted it to DHS.
As
That
part of
was
like
really
the
during
Patriot Act and everything after September 11th.
exactly. That was really during the Bush administration after we had 9/11 and this country and terrorism. We revamped the whole system. But that's not to say that they did any comprehensive immigration reform. The last time we had comprehensive immigration reform was 1996 with IRA. I just call it IRA. Do you know what
Yeah,
it
I don't know what the full name is anymore. Yeah.
Right. But when you hear in the news about comprehensive immigration reform, we really haven't had it in 25 years. 96 during the Clinton administration was when we last had. Um, but so when INS switched to DHS, that wasn't even a comprehensive reform. It was just a conversion of it to a different, a reorganizing of all the different agencies.
So is that to say that like today's kind of immigration policies landscape is like pretty similar to how it was 25 years ago? Or have there been like any big changes?
I would say that generally the processes of how immigration with how they process application and benefits is still the same. How they place people in removal and deportations is the same from 25 years ago. There are different systems in place and different policies in place, but generally the departments that you're working in is all the same.
Thank you.
Rashmi, did you have anything to add?
No, yeah.
That's kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, I think I think in general, like if we're talking about like pathways here, all the pathways are the same as they were like 25 years ago, but how people can receive those, immigration benefits, what the internal process looks like, what the filing looks like, and what the like scrutiny that is put on all the applications is, I think is very different than 25 years ago. But I think that's where a lot of the comprehensive immigration reform advocacy really comes in is I mean, 25 years ago versus today, we're in a very different world. And it's hard to just have the same buckets, that people can try to fit into that were 25, 30 years old, when our world is much more global today than it was 25 years ago.
Right. I would say that when I talk to my boss who's been in immigration for 40 years, it's, the people coming here are very different now, are very different from people coming 25, 40 years ago. Now people come here, they want to stay here. They're not just coming temporarily and going home. They really want to migrate and live here permanently, and they will take much more risk than they did before. That's what I've kind of heard from my boss who's been in this for 40 years. But speaking of buckets of immigration, I want to move on to non-immigrants versus immigrants. There's two different ways to come and stay in the United States. Either you get a non-immigrant visa or you have an immigrant visa. And the difference is non-immigrant visas, NIVs, are visas that are issued to individuals who intend to stay temporarily. versus immigrant visas are for people who want to come and stay permanently. They have an intention to stay permanently. That intent is very important and significant because whenever you apply for, like, say you come for a business or visitor visa, um, and you come into the United States and you have your visa and you present it to CBP at the airport, your intention is really only to stay for that limited purpose of that visa, which is a visitor visa. And they grant you, 6 months to come. But then you're supposed to go, right? You're promising as you're landing at the airport, knocking on the door of the United States and saying, hey, can I'm here to visit, just a tour. And CBP will open the door and let you in, but they're only letting you in for 6 months. Now, if you cross that intent, if you mix that temporary intention with a permanent intention, immigration and the government's not going to like it. So there's very different ways to come permanently. And I think there's over 20 categories of ways to come temporarily. For permanent ways to stay, it's really split into business, family, and humanitarian relief, which we're going to get to. Rashmi, you want to take our first true and false question?
Yes. So, for our members and, for our listening audience, most people have known, and if you're here, of course, have some type of path people came in and either don't remember what it is. It's probably much easier than it is today. And so, most people, the myth that when Allison and I get phone calls, it's, oh, my cousin or my neighbor came, it should be really easy. So a general myth is, my family members or, neighbors came in to the US 30 years ago, it must still be the same process. And that's false, because as we kind of had broached about earlier, while the buckets that people are requesting might be similar, the process, the scrutiny that's there, and just general operations of what you need to do to file for things is much different. So especially with Asian Americans coming today, what we would have provided advice for, 30 years ago is much different than how we consult and provide legal advice for Asian Americans today. And so hopefully today will give you just like a really high level of what are the main pathways that Asian Americans take today to come to the US. And we'll work through both business, family, and humanitarian. So I think first, let's start with student visas. So international students, international programs are a very popular way that Asian Americans come to the US still. This was very popular, between 50 to 30 years ago, and it still is extremely popular today. Universities and colleges really rely on students to come into the US. Most international students that come in and go to college and universities here, they actually pay out-of-state tuition, which are hefty tags, and students and colleges and universities, based on their budget, really depend on international students, A, wanting to come to the US, and then B, picking their school, so that their budgeting and their operations can continue to run based on tuition fees. So a lot of students can come from anywhere between elementary school and PhD. Students are generally admitted to the US as duration of status, which just essentially means that as long as you are in a valid F1 student program and you remain in student programs, you would be here lawfully. Typically, most students come in at the bachelor's or higher degree level. So if you come here and receive a bachelor's or master's or PhD, you typically would get work authorization to stay after the degree to really train for what the degree you earned was for. So, if you came for a bachelor's in business, you would get a year of work training that you can stay in the US and then get some more training based on the field that you're in. And at that point can either try to stay in the US with other non-immigrant or immigrant options if the person has any, or they would leave the US at that point. If you come to the US and receive a degree in either bachelor, master's, or PhD that is more STEM focused, then you would receive up to 3 years of work authorization after you earn the degree in order to stay, get training, and potentially have more options to move to other non-immigrant or immigrant categories if the person wants to stay here in the US. What's been more of a new trend with universities here is sponsoring students and having people work with certain what's called curricular practical training, where they'll work for companies or organizations as a part of earning their degree. That is definitely more common today than it was, 30 years ago, even though the CPT, curricular practical training, has been around. Again, a lot of Asian Americans, when they come to the US, they come, they like it, they want to stay, they want to provide for their family, both here and abroad. And this work training component after their degree is really essential to kind of start that process for them. Next,
Rashmi,
yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to, so I get a lot of calls, and I focus more on family and deport, but I do get, some calls from NC State students and UNC students, very scared and worried about this OPT and the CPT, and it's actually quite, complex what they're able to work in, what they think they're able to work in, and how that will affect them moving forward. Can you just talk a little bit about the complexity of the OPT and then what they're supposed to do after? Because it's kind of like it's kind of like a tease, right? Like, okay, we're gonna let you stay, but then after the end of that, you're really, got to figure out what happens.
Yeah, you really need to leave. Yes.
Yeah,
I
right.
think, one thing is, because most colleges and universities offer the CPT, so during school component training, one thing is it's really important that the student doesn't use more than 12 months. So if you think about a student who is here that is having summer internships, right, as a part of their program, well, working with a company during the summer between their, let's say, junior and senior year would be considered CPT training. So as a part of their degree program, they must use less than 12 months of CPT in order to qualify for any post-grad work training through this OPT, whether it be 1 year or 3 years. So that's really where a lot of confusion comes up. That's even before the person has the degree. Once they graduate, there's a very limited 90-day window where the students have to apply for OPT with paperwork that is quote unquote fresh, like signed within 30 days from the school, and send it to USCIS. And now, as of a few weeks ago, they have an online system to help students, really, because it's a very complicated process for something very simple, which is to ask for a work authorization document. But the 1 year period, typically that most people will have, students can either volunteer their time, get paid. They must work at least 20 hours in order to be considered like in status from an F1 OPT's perspective. They must, of course, work within their field, but the initial 1 year OPT is much more flexible than that 2 year request after, which is what STEM degree graduates are able to request. So if, let's say, an entrepreneur comes out of state and they have their own startup and they're like, hey, this is an amazing business, we want to work in it. Well, we're going to have an issue after 1 year because the person is technically allowed to be self-employed for that 1 year OPT period, but not for the 2 years. So, a lot of times they're kind of vetting other options. The next one we'll talk about too is one that, we use with, some Asian Americans clients of ours, and it's the E2 investment visa. And basically it's for individuals abroad who are nationals of countries that we have treaties with in order to use this visa. They are allowed to come to the US as entrepreneurs or stay in the US if they're already here. If they either buy a business, start a business, give a substantial investment of their own earned money, into that business. And substantial really varies because, let's say, if you buy a gas station versus if you buy, a working factory of some sort, the amount of capital that will need to be given, there's no fixed dollar amount that immigration puts on this. But you would kind of look at the business and say, okay, what is the fair market value in that county for that type of business? And then we'll see if our foreign national who's trying to ask for the E2 option really has that. So, the countries that we can use this for: Bangladesh, Taiwan, South Korea, Pakistan, Philippines, Singapore, Sri Lanka, Thailand. Unfortunately, our other countries, we don't have a treaty for right now. That's something that is always talked about. We advocated for it. Particularly, we advocate for India being a part of a treaty, but politics makes things so complicated. So that ask is always a part of conversations, but it's a much harder task to fulfill. So, for some of these students that are coming out, if they're entrepreneurs and they don't fit within one of these, treaty countries, then, their options are certainly more limited on, what they're going to do.
Great. I'm actually going to turn on this small active speaker video so they can see who's talking. I don't know, Fan, if that made any difference, if you're able to see us talking or if you're just able to see the screen.
Right now on the Facebook Live, people are able to see all talking.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. True or false? My parents and or siblings are US citizens. They can sponsor me for LPR or lawful permanent resident status. So that is true, but I say that you'll have to get in the back of the line because there are two types of family sponsorship in the United States. One is immediate relatives, and another is family-based preference categories. So immediate relatives are those who are children under 21, spouses of US citizens, parents of US citizens, or children over 21, US citizens over 21. So those immediate relatives are not subject to the quota system. The United States has a numerical limitation on the number of visas they can give every year based on family preference categories. But if you are an immediate relative, you're not subject to that quota system. So that's why I said maybe they can file a green card for you, but it depends on what category you fit under. The other category is family-based preference categories. So these four categories: children of US citizens over 21, spouses and children under 21 of green card holders or children of green card holders over 21, married children of US citizens or siblings of US citizens. Those are all family-based preference categories that are subject to the quota system. The quota system is, so to give you a little bit of background, the Immigration and Nationality Act grants 675,000 immigrant visas each year. Remember, these are immigrant visas and not non-immigrant visas. Immigrant visas are the ones that are the type of visas that allow you to stay permanently or, the pathway to the green card. So 675,000 a year. Now, for family-based preference categories, they start with, it's this very complicated equation that they use, which is in the statutory, INA. But they start with 480,000 visas per year. They subtract the number of immigrant visas that they granted the previous year, and additionally subtract the number of employment-based visas, because remember, this is family-based, not employment-based. And then they come up with the family-based preference numbers that are available.
Allison, there has to be a less complicated way to do this.
No, this is totally,
so complicated.
I actually had to look this up again because honestly, for us practitioners, it doesn't matter, right? Because you know why it doesn't matter? We have a beautiful, complicated chart that we look at every single month. This is called the Bulletin Chart. And immigration lawyers study this. Every first of the month, the Department of State releases these two charts for family-sponsored visa applications. These are the charts that these dates will show you what the date of the application that they are working on. So they're not supposed to, they have to grant at least 226,000 per year. Okay. Normally so it has to, that's like the minimum they can grant, but they should not be granting over 480. Generally, I mean, overall, 66% of immigrant visas are family based. And you look at, and so this chart changes every month based on those numbers that they're, those calculations. So for F1 status, remember, I'm going to skip around a little bit. So I hope this is not too confusing, but I think it's important. But F1 visas are children of US citizens, children over 21 of US citizens. They are family preference 1. Currently, if you are a child of a US citizen over 21 and you're from China, they are working on applications that were filed October 22nd, 2014. If you're from Mexico, they are working on applications filed April 1st, 1998. This means that if you were 23 years ago, your US citizen parent filed an application for you, you are just now reaching the front of the line in order
Allison,
to
what
have.
is that? Can you remind us what that F3 for Mexico is? October 1996.
This is married children of US citizens.
Okay. Oh my God.
So if you were married in 1990, if your parent who is a US citizen filed an application, an I-130 application for you in 96 and you were married at that time. So this one is for unmarried and this one is for married. It is better to be, I guess you could say it's better to be unmarried because you would be ahead 2 years, but I mean, you can't control these numbers anyways because it's like this complicated calculation that I just explained. But so Mexicans are now in this category are now only able to finalize their application. And that's what really is sad about this quota system because I mean, look how far these numbers are. Now, the second chart is dates for filing. So just a few years ago, they started, this used to be all in one chart, but just a few years ago, they wanted to make it more complicated and split it into 2 different charts. Dates for filing is when you can start the application to pursue your visa. Dates for final action is when the Department of State can actually approve it. So you may have started 2 years ago if you were a child over 21 of a US citizen, but it's going to take another 2 years for them to actually approve and approve your visa. So this is another reason why, I mean, when we were under the Trump administration, there was a lot of talk about chain migration and how, families come here and, they just bring all their family members over. And this is what he's referring to, that you're filing for you come here and then you file for a family member and they come here and then they file for a family member and they come here. But chain migration is, it's just a hot word for people who, want to limit immigration, but look how limited immigration can be already. You can just tell from these charts that there's a really long wait period.
That's what we call family reunification,
Right.
as opposed to chain migration.
It's all optics, it
Absolutely.
really depends on what perspective you're coming from. And so back to the true or false question, I have a US citizen parent, and my siblings are US citizens. Siblings of US citizens are subject to the F4 category. So if you're from any of these 4 countries, they're only working on applications from then. If you're from any other country other than China, India, Mexico, and Philippines, then they're working on applications from here. Mm-hmm. And the reason why they specifically enumerate China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines is because those traditionally are the countries that we get the highest number of applications. And then the rest of the world are subject to, this first column.
So looking at these charts and then hearing about, there's these caps and we're like over 10 years, 20 years behind on some of these lines. Is there any like substantiation, or like where does that idea come from that like there's this huge influx of immigrants right now happening? Because is that because the caps have been kind of the same, right? Or like where's that coming from?
Right. So remember, we're talking about legal immigration, right? There's always this argument of, oh, people come here illegally, and we have all this influx of people here that are undocumented. What we're talking about with this family-based immigration are the people that have filed a long time ago, have remained outside the United States, generally, are people who've remained outside the United States and are waiting for their number to come up. So those people are just patiently waiting in their home countries. Now, that's a really good question, Finn, because there are people that are here now that may have filed 20 years ago, and they said they may have come illegally, crossing the border. They may have come on a visitor visa or a student visa and then overstayed their visa because they didn't want to go back to their home country, for whatever reason. And now they come to me or Rashmi and they say, look, my mom did file an application. I'm from Mexico. My mom filed an application for me. Oh, I'm sorry. Back in 1999. Okay. Or let's say 2001. But I'm just here illegally. So the question is, okay, well, can we utilize that visa? Your mom filed in 2001. You have one more year. They're only working on applications from 2000. So you have one more year to wait. In that 1 year, let's think about how we can utilize that visa. Now, I don't want to go down this path of like getting really complicated, but then we'll go through some options and seeing, okay, well, you're here undocumented. How do we get back, utilize that visa? You may have to go back to Mexico and try to get your visa there. There may be other special ways that you can get back in status and utilize that visa. But that's where we have a problem, Fan, with a lot of people who may have gotten impatient and just come in the meantime. So, and that's also where it gets complicated because one of the proposals for immigration reform is recapturing lost priority dates, people who may have missed out on those applications, or allowing them to utilize it without having to go back to their home country. How do we get people here that have been waiting for so long, but then may not be able to adjust because they fell out of status? Because generally, if you fall out of status, like you can't utilize these family-based preference categories.
I see. Thank you.
Rashmi, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think I mean, the sentiment that, people change their lives abroad based on this visa bulletin that Allison has gone through. So like whether to get married, not to get married, these are all decisions that like families make every single day, for like consequential purposes, so they're like, oh, if my kid gets married, then they don't have a category on the bulletin anymore. And it's really significant what this really does and how it impacts millions of people every day. So yeah, I mean, Allison went over it so clearly, but just to really emphasize that like people check this bulletin every day. They check it every month when it is reissued, because they're waiting 20, 30 years for some of this. Their life depends on it.
Right. And then if they make the decision to come here and overstay or are undocumented here, how do we utilize that old?
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
lost that petition. Or
Yeah.
other complications are what if the petitioner dies? What if your mother passes away? And how do we reinstate that petition? So
Yeah.
these are all things that Rashmi and I have to go through and strategize through. But I also want to emphasize that these final action dates and dates for filing charts are also made available for employment-based applications. Sorry, no, just final action dates. They only have one chart for employment-based.
They have two, but they only really use the final action date one. Like the dates of filing is used maybe 1 month out of the year. And last year, actually, at the end of the year, they used the dates of filing for the employment base. But the numbers look bad. The people are waiting so long for green cards, depending on where you're from. So, obviously for Asia, Philippines and India, they're in China, there's just such a long wait for people. And so they are, people want to come to America. We're an awesome country. People want to come here, bring their family, they want to earn money, they want to help their family abroad, they want to help their family here. Like, these are people, I always say that, immigrants and non-immigrants that come to the US are some of the bravest people I know, because if you can pack up your life and just say, I'm going to go to a country I've never been before, I don't know the culture, I probably don't know the language, and I'm going to make the best of it. I mean, think about what type of people that brings. And, for the employment based, a lot of these people are, very bright and they're hard workers. And, there's not, today there's, very distinct visa buckets that are available, but, it's definitely much more highly scrutinized today than it was, 30 years ago, in terms of who can stay, how they can stay, and then eventually how they can receive a green card to stay here more long term.
And speaking of the employment base, let's pose our next question. So my cousin owns a company. They can sponsor me for work visas. True or false, Rashmi?
Maybe. So I'm giving that lawyer answer. I'm like, maybe, not a good true or false, but it really depends on who the company is, what the person's education background is, experience background, what the job that's being sponsored. So the most common work visa that is sponsored per year is the H1b Visa. So a lot of this seems like alphabet soup because there's just basically letters that are tagged on different things, but essentially we're just go through it really just high level, the most common ones, just based on time as well. So H1b Visa can be sponsored by companies on behalf of potential employees. And the job itself that is being sponsored needs to, at a minimum, have someone perform that position where they have a bachelor's degree or more. Then the person that's being sponsored must at least have a bachelor's degree or more, and have the similar education or experience that's required for the degree. This is the most common work visa that's used just because typically, most people will fall into that category. So if they've come here, received bachelor's degrees, master's or PhDs, or if they're abroad and they've had education, bachelor's or master's or PhD, and when come to the US, typically this is the number one work visa that we'll look at first. It's available for a person to be on for 6 years, and post that 6-year time, they would have to have some type of green card sponsorship done by their company or another possible way to stay past that 6 years. The one caveat that really kind of is more of a pain point with the H1b visa is that there are salaries that are designated per position, per county in the US. So if you were, let's say, in Wake County and you are a software developer, so there is a portal online where the Department of Labor does wage surveys for most companies, small to large, in every county in the US for software developers. And, as an H1B practitioner, you get the salary, you have to figure out what the experience and education that's required for it, and make sure that that salary is tagged on the work visa application that you're filing for the company for that person. And so really this prevailing wage requirements come in to protect the US salary workers, this US salary for US citizens. But essentially, most of our, I would say, H1B employees, are probably more expensive for companies to hire, just because those wages that are posted online are an average of small to large companies. And sometimes that's hard, especially for smaller, medium-sized companies, to meet those wages. And typically these wages are much higher than the wages that their own internal hiring practices and comp analysis really brings out. So, the H1B visa, a common myth that is always talked about is, companies pay them less, so they sponsor them more. Absolutely not the case. Most of the time, they're paid, at level with other employees or more. And so the company is spending more money in order to retain the talent they need for their company and for their growth and for the position that they're trying to fill. Problem with H1b visas, even though it's the most common, is that there's a limited number available per year. So there's 85,000 new H1b visas available per year. So if someone is either here in the US or they're abroad and they want to get on H1b, they have to go through what now is a random computer generated lottery system in order to earn one of those 85,000 slots. So this lottery really only started about 4 or 5 years ago, because up until that point, when you file an H1b, there wasn't the demand of 85,000 for that allotment, but there was. And then suddenly, especially with the tech industry and other industries really needing specific STEM talent, that wasn't available in the US in the numbers that we currently need today, the H1b visa has become really popular. So, as an example, the last couple of years, the average number of H1b applications that are sent to immigration in order to try to request these 85,000 slots are anywhere between 250,000 to 330,000. So if you can imagine, those numbers are people behind every single one of those applications being sent to immigration. So if 300,000 applications are being sent to immigration to request this H1b visa, 85,000 people are the ones that are actually selected to receive this H1b visa. Everyone else has to either keep their F1 status active if they're currently here in the US, look for other options, non-immigrant or immigrant, to stay here in the US, or they leave and go abroad. And if they want to come back to the US, they will try the next year, because it's done annually. They'll try the next year for their company to sponsor them. So, this cap, this quote unquote cap, is what you'll see in the news and hear, and people will, in March of every year, really kind of have this discussion, because students and families really plan their life around whether they're selected in this computer generated lottery or not. And one component of immigration reform is always to just up the number of 85,000 allotment of H1b visas, because this number worked previously when our industries and globalization was much less, but it doesn't work now with the amount of STEM talent our companies are needing. And the companies are ranging from startups, small, medium, and large. Really, most companies always have the same issue where they are they put job ads out for certain types of occupations, and they cannot find talent here that has the degrees in order to perform the job. So that's kind of where the H1b visa kind of comes in to supplement that.
And I just want to bring it, sorry, Rashmi, bring on remember, this is a specialty occupation. So we're not talking about like low-level managerial jobs. We're not talking about farm workers. We're not talking about like types of job, like sales jobs, low-end sales jobs. These are specialty occupations that need higher level of education. And just to zoom out a little bit, that's like the whole, what Rashmi is saying is that's the whole debate on, well, they're taking away jobs from the United States, but there's a vetting process here for H1Bs to make sure they qualify for these. So I think it says, don't you think it says something about our economy? We need this higher skilled talent to fill these jobs because they are vetting American citizens for these jobs.
Yeah.
And there's just not enough talent. So
Yeah.
I think it also says something about, the education, our population. There's something to be said about, without getting too political here, about, retaining talent, but also internally, the United States really needs to up our level of talent, because you can see that now companies are going, they have to go outside of the United States to get talent rather than home here on our home front. So
yeah, and that's so spot on, because I think there's certainly pushes to boost like STEM interest. Like there has to be STEM degree interest to produce the amount of grads that are needed for the companies that are requiring these people for positions. So especially as our like IT industry and everything gets more technical and technology based, like we are just not graduating enough STEM degrees for the jobs that are required. It's just a pure numbers game. And so I think, Allison, I'll probably skip the next two slides and go to the green card sponsorship because, most people for, Asian Americans coming here, if they come on a work visa, such as an H, they're likely going to want to stay past 6 years. And typically the option for them is a green card sponsorship from the company. So the company will basically, at a point where someone's on an H1b temporary work visa, say, I'm going to, sponsor you for a green card. The process is very cumbersome, what a company has to undergo in order to sponsor a green card for any foreign national. They have to test the US labor market for a certain period of time in multiple locations. They'll place job ads, and the job ads can be placed anywhere from, we're required to do it with job orders, with state workforce agencies, Sunday newspapers. I feel like, green card sponsorships really keep Sunday newspaper class of fields alive, because who else is really putting a class of field in a Sunday newspaper these days? And multiple other places online, whether it be job search engines like monster.com or journals and magazines and other newspapers that might be more local or ethnic to what the job position may be asked for. So a company has to go a really rigorous process for 30 days of various recruitment, and then there has to be a 30-day wait period afterwards. As long as no resumes are sent that the person meets the education and experience that's required for the position, and there's no US worker that's essentially available for that position, the company can move forward and sponsor a green card for that individual. So this is how, when most people come to the US, their typical path for business immigration is F1 student, get lucky and get caught in the lottery, get an H1b visa, their company sponsors them for a green card, and then they stay here in the US with a green card. And then they'll, maybe look at the family reunification and try to sponsor other family members, which is kind of what Allison had talked about before.
Great. And heading into our last bucket of pathways to immigrate here, because I have no family or business to sponsor me, I am out of options to get status in the US. That is false. There is humanitarian relief available. This is what you hear in the news often. I think you hear everything in the news often now for immigration, family-based, employment-based, humanitarian.
Immigration's been in the news so much, obviously, for the last 4 or 5 years. And I was telling some friends, I was like, I just want it not to be in the news for a while, that would be so wonderful.
I would love for people to stop talking about it. Then people would have less opinions and we could just keep going with our work without being subjected to defending our work or, or complaining about our work.
Yeah.
Anyways, so humanitarian relief, there's many different types of humanitarian relief. This is really for people. So when you're talking about each of these options, you're probably looking at an individual who is here undocumented, who has no other family or business option for them. They may be someone who is an asylee, which is different from refugee. Asylees, they're held to the same standard of persecution to come to the United States. People who apply for asylum are people who are already within the United States, inside our borders. People who are refugees have been granted that same status, but they're outside the United States and they're then waiting to come into the United States. So deferred action is another type of humanitarian relief. There's different types of deferred action. There's DACA. Most of you probably know about the Dreamers and the deferred action for childhood arrivals. There's temporary protected status, which is a humanitarian relief granted for people of specific designated countries that go through natural disasters or war-torn countries. Military parole in place if you are a parent or a spouse of a child or a person in the military, then you can also be granted the ability to stay. A humanitarian medical, if you have serious medical needs or a very sympathetic case, then you could be granted. And if you are granted deferred action, they would allow you a temporary to be able to stay here and work here and live here temporarily without being subject to deportation or removal. So I put here, you may say that he's a dreamer because John Lennon himself from the Beatles was granted deferred action. He came in 1970 with, I think 71, with a visitor visa. He overstayed his visa. He was placed in deport proceedings and he was going to the New York Immigration Court. His lawyer here on the right was representing him and trying to get him to be able to stay, but his green card was denied. There was no other option for him. So the FOIA records later show that he was granted deferred action, which again is a type of relief for people who have no other option and just have a very sympathetic case. So they decided to just allow him to stay, and then I think he eventually was able to, get his green card through an appeals process. But he really paved the way for DACA and Dreamers. And then hopefully, with this upcoming year, a new administration, this being a bipartisan issue, that there may be a pathway to green card for DACA individuals. U visa and T visa, they are visas for certain victims of crimes. So if this program was really created for people who were here without status, they wanted to encourage people who were here without status to report crimes to the police, and for public safety reasons. And in exchange, they would give them a visa for it. So T visas for trafficking victims, U visas are for victims of various crimes, including felonious assault. If you're, I'm like blanking right now, kidnapping, extortion, those types of crimes. VAWA is the Violence Against Women's Act. They are for individuals of abuse or even children who have been neglected or abandoned here in the United States. And then a cancellation of removal is a type of application that would allow you to get a green card in removal proceedings if you're placed in immigration court proceedings and have been here for a certain period of time. Okay, true or false? I am a green card holder. I can travel in and out of the United States freely, and I cannot be deported.
False. Yes.
I feel like that was kind of like, well, maybe. Anyways, there are plenty of issues that green card holders can face. Rashmi and I think Rashmi, you probably do too, encourage people to get their citizenship if that's something that they want. Just apply for it as soon as you're able to.
I think that's one of the big, I think myths also. I know a lot of Asian Americans, when they receive their green card, then they think they're just, okay, it's smooth sailing. And yes, it is, unless these factors you're going to come into play. But I think people forget that you still have to retain your permanent residency. And it can be taken away. It's not a forever, benefit like citizenship is.
Right. Citizenship allows you to vote and be what can citizens do that green cards are? It allows you to register and to vote. Yeah. And it
sponsor faster depending on who the person is.
Right. Certain issues are, you can be arrested for being in possession of marijuana. And if you're a green card holder, that could be an issue of inadmissibility. They can place you back in removal proceedings. Or if you've traveled outside the United States and you come back in, they find out you have a criminal record, then they could place you in removal proceedings. They could be investigating your case and see that there are some fraud issues from when you were granted the green card and then try to take it away. So there's plenty of issues that we see that green card holders face. And it's really important to remember that you being granted a green card or lawful permanent residence means that you are intending to permanently reside in the United States. You're not, once you leave the United States for over a year, you are considered to have abandoned your status. You shouldn't leave for more than 6 months at a time. And you should keep paying your tax returns and living here as if you are a citizen, but don't vote and don't register to vote. But it can be taken away. So we have I don't know if we have time, maybe a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Allison and Rashmi, first of all, for like sharing all of this information. Yeah, I'll start with a question first from Thomas in the Facebook comments. Well, first there was a comment that was, I was here when John Lennon was big. Our government was being very blank with him because he was a Vietnamese protest or a Vietnam War protester. So yeah, we've got folks who were here when that was happening. I had no idea that that was a thing. So this is
Yeah,
good.
I had no idea until Allison got it.
Well,
Um,
I don't think he was the first, but I think he definitely, I mean, he's definitely one of the most
High profile.
very high profile. And I don't think people would have known unless, you know, those FOIA records came out and yeah.
yeah, it was a big surprise. And Thomas also commented and asked, what if someone came here from China on, this might be a more technical question. What if someone came here from China, for example, on like a work visa and then filed for asylum while they were still here? Is that a possibility? Is that like, do they have prospects? And then the last piece was just also discuss fiance visa. I'm not sure what question that is, but that's the comment.
Do you want to take that asylum one, Allison?
Sure. Yeah. So asylum is available for people who have faced persecution in their home country or are afraid of returning to their home country because of some persecution they may face in the future. Now, if you are here on a work visa, that means either you came on a work visa and it expired and now you have no status and you want to apply for asylum, or you're here on a work visa, you're still in status and you are afraid of going back and you want that extra level of protection. Because if you do win asylum, you would be eligible for a green card after 1 year after you've been granted. So yes, the short answer is yes, you can apply for asylum while you're on a work visa. The asylum would also give you the benefit of having a work permit while the asylum is pending. Asylum, you hear a lot about it in the news. It's a huge issue. It takes on average 1 to 4 or 5 years to be resolved. So if you don't win asylum, you could be placed in removal proceedings, and that could be a whole other complication. Fiance, well, Rashmi, do you have anything to add on that part?
Yeah, no, I think like, so when we have clients that are on like a work visa, but they also have an asylum claim, an asylum petition pending, we just try to keep their work visa like valid as long as possible, because sometimes we don't know what the strength of their asylum case is. And so if they're happen to be here on a valid work visa, we'll still try to keep their visa valid and still look at options for company to sponsor them for a green card as well. So someone can be here and have multiple different filings. It just obviously depends on the strategy, what type of asylum case, we think is strong or not strong. And, also just, I think, what are the long-term prospects of getting this person to be able to be protected here, especially if they're asking for asylum. So yeah, there's a lot of considerations, but definitely, a seasoned immigration attorney is probably the person to figure out, what are all the different options that I can do while I'm on work visa here that won't impact it.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun part of being an immigration lawyer too. What we always tell our clients is you have all these parallel tracks, right? You can be on a work visa, you can be on applying for asylum, you can be applying for a U visa, you can be applying for all of these different types of visas to stay. And on these different tracks, they can overlap, and that's fine. But you're playing the long game here. How do we get here to stay as long as possible on whatever type of relief you can? So that is the fun part and of being an immigration lawyer is playing with all these different options for relief. And fiance is, you can apply for a fiance visa. I generally don't like to apply for a fiance visa because it's just faster, if not the same time, than just to get married and to bring someone over.
Same, I think that the process is cheaper too, because you have like less steps involved where you're filing with immigration. And yeah, we counsel people to just have to get married in their jurisdiction and then just start the process, because they're going to be separated if one person's abroad and one person's here 4 is still a large amount of time just based on processing times of applications. So we'll generally recommend people if they're engaged and they want to get married to just get married, to start all of that paperwork process already.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess since we've hit 3, one more question, I guess, to close it out is, what are some takeaways from some of this? Like, a lot of the things you went over were high level and also somewhat technical. Like, what are some takeaways that you want people to step away from this presentation from? Maybe it's and I guess maybe like, is there anything that you think is like commonly shared in the media, or like maybe common misconceptions that you'd like to speak, debunk maybe based on some of what you've shared today?
Rashmi, you want to go first? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I think like I'll kind of respond to like the takeaways, I think, from the session. And I think just, one thing is immigration is complicated. And so, one thing that I would love is if people reach out to immigration attorneys to ask all of their questions and tell all of their story and be really open about what their immigration background is, because an immigration attorney is going to be much better than Googling. So typically, a lot of people, of course, we use the internet to get information, but in order to impact your life and decide what options are available for you, speak with an immigration attorney. It's always worth it to either emphasize what you feel like you know about what you can do, or actually maybe strategize more options. Allison and I went today through very small section of immigration of what is available, kind of the most kind of basic high level of what is most common for Asian Americans. But there are so many loopholes and there's so many other visa categories in this alphabet soup. Like I think Allison had meant there's like 20 more non-immigrant visa categories on one of our first slides than what we could even put on a slide, So I think the takeaway is, speak with a seasoned professional and just be open with your background, and and also be in for the long game, because immigration is not a fast acting machine. You really have to strategize for years in advance, and definitely speaking with an attorney will be able to help strategize what is going to come 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I think Rashmi had said it perfectly. Not seeing an immigration lawyer is important also, like every 1 or 2 years, because the laws are always changing. Under the last administration, you wake up every day and there was something new. So for good or for bad. But I would suggest that you continue to see a lawyer every 1 or 2 years. I always tell my clients, like, here are your options. Your last option is to do nothing and to come back and see me in a year or 2 years. Because I mean, just like you would go see your doctor for a checkup, you would also go see a lawyer to check in on your immigration status and see if there's any new laws available to you. I would say that immigration is so politicized now. It's talked about in the media. It's talked about. It feels like everybody has an opinion on it. I used to travel a lot pre-COVID. Every week I'd go around the country. I'd go, to hearings. I'd go to interviews for clients. I'd, sign new contracts for clients everywhere, and I take Ubers all the time. And every time, I don't like to talk to my Uber drivers, but they always ask, what do you do for work? You're only here, how long are you staying in my city? I'm like 8 hours. And they'll say, what are you doing for work? And they'll say, if I say, oh, I'm an immigration lawyer, they will either get really quiet, and it used to be, oh, they'll just stop, not say anything. The last administration, it just became so politicized, and all of a sudden I kept getting all of these comments and opinions and all these things and concerns about immigration and misconceptions. And so I know that people have a lot of opinions about it, but don't judge your neighbor and don't judge your community member. We've always been a country of a land of opportunity, a welcoming country. I think we should continue to be a country that embraces diversity. Every single person here has a story and a background and somewhere they came from. And if you don't know it, I encourage you to talk to your family, your grandparents, your great grandparents, how, you know, research how they came. Everybody has a story on how they came here, and every country is different in how they pursue that American dream. So I want us to continue to being a country of opportunity and welcoming diversity here.
Thanks so much, Allison. And Rashmi, do you have anything to add before we close out?
No, I think what Allison had mentioned at the end is really key. And I think for any of our audience members, you know, if you don't know or remember your own immigration path, and you have elders that are still around that can provide that story, ask them. It's a really beautiful story to know the inner workings of how someone got here, what their feelings were around on their journey. And I think that it's really important to have those conversations because it colors our view and perspective on others, and what other people go through and what other people's wants are. And so that's one thing is, you know, I wish, say my grandparents were around so I could even ask, what did it feel like when my parents left India? Like, how was that? What was that experience like? And really just get to the heart of what this is, which is people moving for their own various reasons, and really wanting to celebrate that. So I definitely think I love the storytelling that this organization does because I feel like it does a great job of getting to the human experience of us as Asian Americans. And that's really why we're here. And that's really why Alice and I really enjoy what we do, is because, and we think it's fun, is because it's really about impacting people. And, you know, the clients are awesome. I mean, you wouldn't find clients like this in every practice area. So we got really lucky.
Yeah, immigration is not, last comment, sorry. Immigration is
Alice
not.
and I talk a lot. That's why I had to,
Because
that's why I had to move over slides.
I do love my work. I mean, immigration law is not like criminal law where it's so adversarial. I mean, it's become very adversarial, but it's not like, you know, someone wins and someone loses at the end of the day. If you get someone's client, if you win someone's green card for them, you get, you know, a new family in the United States. You know, they're buying homes, they're working lawfully, they're on a pathway to citizenship, and this country wins because they have another individual who is likely going to be a productive person in this country. There are lots of discretionary factors when they admit someone or when they give someone a green card. So it's a very special line of work that we do, and I think it's a win-win. The government wins, this country wins, and we win when our client wins.
Thank you all so much. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We did have a couple of questions from a couple different people that were more like specific cases. So I will send them NCAT's email, and then unless there's I'm guessing you probably don't want to stay on and answer those questions. They're probably too specific. So I'll just
you can just, you know, intro as you do to our email addresses, and then we're both happy to help with any kind of more technical questions people might have.
Okay, perfect. I will drop those emails in the comments. And yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for putting this on.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right. Bye-bye, guys.